Hi everyone, so it's the middle of the PTR roughly, so I want to give a bit of a summary and my thoughts and just give you a bit of an understanding of what is going on. Now, first things first, I do want to say that I really appreciate that Blizzard is trying to kind of break up the meta in many cases. They're trying to make a lot of new items and legendaries, new uniques. There's a lot of new stuff in there actually that is actually really interesting to play around with and think about for builds. They're really trying to open up the possibilities, so that is great. So with that being said, oh boy, if only anything worked correctly. So I do have to say that it's actually really hard to even test anything consistently. Like, first of all, we don't even have access to all the new stuff. It's like you have to like slowly grind out uniques. Personally, I've been blasting this PTR for like 12 hours a day for 3 days straight, and I have found like, I don't know, 2 or so of the new unique items, and there's 15 of them. And I have not even like touched a few classes because it just takes so long to even get started and try. You don't have temper manuals, you have to get the aspects in your codex again, and then you don't find the items from the new system, from the Infernal Hordes, for example. They did a little bit of a patch there to try to make it somewhat playable, at least to even get into that Infernal Horde system on a higher tier, so that was nice. So that was a little bit of a nice response there, I guess. But the fact that we don't even get those uniques handed out to us at all, and I hear from other people, like, you know, some of the Maxwell guys or something that are also like playing the PTR, trying to get some of the testing in so they can make the guides for Season 5. Well, some of them don't even have access to the items. And at this point, we are just like trading items between us occasionally, and, you know, just, you know, someone gives me one of the uniques from chat, for example. I sometimes ask my chat, and occasionally I get lucky and someone actually has one of the new uniques and gives it to me. And then I give that at some point to maybe one of the other guys. And I try to avoid, you know, making an account bound through masterworking, for example. So that's kind of how PTR works right now. So I really hate that. And I really hope that in the future we're going to get some significant improvements here. Now, outside of that, for the patch, well, you might have seen a lot of the videos that I've uploaded and other people have uploaded. A lot of crazy stuff is going on. And I also want to take a little bit of a look at the balance of things, because it's really out of whack. Now, if you look at what Blizzard has said in a campfire chat for Season 5 for this PTR, they talked about especially uniques a lot. And they said that they want to take a look at every single unique in the game and rebalance them to make them more viable and especially increase the high-end potential, so that there's, you know, okay, you find a unique with a certain effect and you know what you got, but it can be a lot better when you find a good roll of it. So they gave some examples. For example, they talked about Tybalt's Will. What is special about Tybalt's Will? It's damage on pants, and they want to kind of double down on what makes one of the unique items special and try to do something similar with every single unique item in the game. So a lot of the balancing that we are going to experience in Season 5 is actually not yet in the PTR, and we don't know how much they will buff certain uniques. In many cases, there will be quite a lot, I imagine. They've already tried that with, for example, Wind Force has been buffed a little bit, but I don't really see anyone using Wind Force so far. We'll see. It may be somewhat usable at least. But there are certain uniques that are really undertuned, that have no place in the game right now. Let's talk about Frostburn, for example. Like, Frostburn was always kind of a weak item anyway, and these days you have a temper that is literally Frostburn, you know, on any slot you want on your armor, for example, right? You can just temper a chance to freeze, and that's your Frostburn. So they have to do some pretty significant reworks on some of those uniques for them to be even considered at all. And that could definitely shift things around a little bit. So we see a lot of, for example, clips from really strong builds and really weak builds on the PTR. Barbs, of course, are really good yet again. That is no surprise. They didn't really nerf any of the really powerful stuff that Barbs have right now. And then they added new uniques on top that just elevate them back to like a crazy level anyway, like even higher than before, basically, despite, for example, bash nerfs coming into this patch. But again, we don't know. For example, how much are they going to buff certain class-specific uniques, certain build-specific uniques? If we talk about, I don't know, Sorg, make the Staff of Endless Rage for Fireball, for example, and then the Gloss of the Illuminator. There's actually 2 uniques for a Fireball build, one of which is kind of mandatory, and the other one which is kind of trash. But, you know, if they buff both of them by a significant amount, then Fireball could, for example, just become a build again, just from that. So we don't really know. But we do have to say that at least currently the balance is really off, and this is a problem that I think is gonna haunt the game again and again basically. And the reason why is because some of the new stuff they're introducing is interestingly very powerful on one hand and has a bit of a downside on the other hand, and you can see this here for example. And it seems like they are trying to make more and more of these kind of items where you have like a strong upside and some kind of downside to compensate for that, or to, you know, basically justify having a very powerful item. But there are definitely some outliers that work really well for certain builds that can maybe be used for all builds. Like Crown of Lucian is probably like one of the biggest examples here that has exactly this kind of theme where you have a very powerful upside and a downside attached to it, and it can be used for basically anything, right? So anything that spends resources, you can get this buff, and then you deal up to 125% extra damage when you stack it up 5 times. That's basically like a starter skies, and then it increases your resource cost. However, it doesn't increase your resource cost all that much because you also have this line here. So you start at -75 and then you additively add 25% extra cost. So with 5 stacks you have a total of 125% bonus damage and 50% bonus resource cost, like extra more cost. So that's basically how that item works. Now there's also a slight bug with this, which is that the first stack of cost is actually not applied. So on the PTR right now it's actually only 25% extra, but that's on the side. And also this is kind of like a wrong tooltip here. So this only works for skills that actually spend resources. So if you have a skill that doesn't spend resources, you cannot actually benefit from this damage buff, despite you having a buff on your bar. Like you can see the buff, you can see the timer, but for some reason it only works with skills that actually spend resources. So either it needs to be changed to that, or this tooltip needs to be adjusted. Either way, this is obviously a very powerful item. This item is so powerful that basically every single build in the game that does not already have a skill, like a build specific unique, which, well, I can only think of Meteor right now, to be honest, with the Starfall Coronate. Every single skill in the game will run this helm. Maybe even Meteor would run this helm actually, despite having its own helm. And then you just like play a different version of Meteor basically. So this is how good that item is. There's like no build in the game that would not run this item in the current version. And you would always have to try to find a way to kind of include this, outside of the fact that currently it doesn't work for builds that don't spend resources, like a minion necro for example. But no matter what they do with this, like if they're gonna fix this and make it work for builds that don't spend resources, we'll see. It is very powerful. So this completely outclasses even Harlequin Crest, and Harlequin Crest already outclasses basically every other helm in the game by quite a mile in almost every single case. So you see there's like a pretty significant power creep going on. Now, power creep is kind of okay, I guess, because it kind of keeps the game somewhat interesting, right? You can like make new interesting effects, you can make people hyped about certain items, and you can just, you know, make people feel good, I guess. But I think that the power creep that we have in Diablo 4 is way out of control already. Now, I don't really want anyone to feel weak, and I don't want people to have no fun or something like that, but I think it's very unhealthy that Blizzard is just like making new uniques, slaps on like 100% or 200% or even a 300% multiplier on some of these items like this, and then just, you know, calls it a new unique item. And what it really will do is that it homogenizes builds, it forces people to use these items, and no one really, like, you know, gains much from this. I think, like, okay, we get more powerful, but I think this builds being like, you know, kind of like forced to use all these uniques, and especially with Blizzard saying they want the target number of uniques to be like around 2 to 4 per build. Well, if you make these kind of items, we are certainly not going to use only 2 uniques in our builds. We're certainly not even going to use only 4 uniques in our builds. In fact, I can show you what the new world looks like. So this is a picture here from a setup that Northra has made. You probably know him, our Sorg guide writer at Maxstrom, and this is the new Arcalash Sorg, ladies and gentlemen. So there are a whole 2 legendary items. So this is what this build looks like. Now there is like maybe it's like 1 or 2 debatable slots. You can talk about Raiment, you can talk about the new Rakanov boots, where maybe you would swap them. But yeah, basically, you know, most of these unique items are like just not debatable. Like every single basic skill build needs to run Pain Gorgers. Every single basic skill build needs to run the new Sword of Arathiel. And every single Sorg build runs the Tarasharang. And every single build just runs Lucian Helm. And in that case, you always combine Lucian Helm with the Starter Skies Ring because, well, they go well together and stuff. And then you have the new low crans amulet. It's also just overtuned as hell. This one here, it's just an insane amount of damage for any crit build, which is, well, most builds in the game. And well, this is the brave new world, guys. And the only reason why there's 2 legendaries is because there's no unique offhand. Otherwise, you would probably run one there, and you need a little bit of armor that you put on the pan. So this is kind of what this looks like right now. And this is even with a lot of uniques that have not even been changed, right? Tarasha has not even been changed yet. I don't know if they're gonna buff it or not. Pingorgers, same story. Raymond, same story. Stardust, same story. So like half of these uniques are not even new or anything like that. They are already just there, and like this build would already just run like 3 or 4 uniques anyway before the new uniques and before any kind of buffs they're trying to do to uniques. So it just kind of like brings us back to season 2, I guess, where everyone was running Tibble's Will and Shaco and Grandfather, and I mean, if you had them, I guess, and they were actually equivalent. But you know, we had so many uniques back in season 2 because this is where they made the boss ladder system, and all of the uniques were just crazy. All of the normal items were just kind of trash. And we're kind of going back exactly to that. I don't know. I don't really like it. I think that it's just... legendaries are just more interesting, to be honest. I mean, it's cool to have uniques and have really special effects. Like Pain Gorgeous, I think, is a really interesting unique. It's a very well-designed unique, I think. But there's a lot of other uniques that are not really much more than just like stat sticks. If a real like Crown of Lucion is basically just stats, right? It's just damage and stats. And that's basically it, right? There's nothing really special about it. And its downside is also negligible. In fact, it's not even really a downside if you look at the combination between Crown of Lucion and Starless Skies, which has a pretty natural synergy. Starless Skies gives you up to 50% resource cost reduction. Lucion gives you extra resource cost. So you just negate the downside of one with the benefit of the other. And you have, you know, a really powerful combo. So if you look at the Crown of Lucion here, we start at 0.25 resource cost, so we have 75% resource cost reduction. Our total cost will be like a quarter basically of the original, and then we add 0.25 again 5 times. So the net result is a 50% increase in resource cost, and then we add Starless Skies stacks, right? And Starless Skies gives you 50% resource cost reduction, and those things multiply. So the net result is that you only spend 75% of the original cost when you have both these items together, and they obviously have perfect harmony. They stack up, you know, one gives you extra cost, one gives you extra cost reduction, and then they kind of just like have an equilibrium basically, and you end up with actually lower cost than before, and you get an insane damage buff from Starless Skies, and then you get an even more insane damage buff from the Crown of Lucion. These downsides here that they're trying to introduce to some of those uniques are not even downsides, you know, this is a joke. This is what it is. You know, a real downside would be something like first of all, this line maybe just not existing, you know, just this, for example, right? So why do we even start with 75% resource cost reduction? Like, why is that on this item, right? It's just ridiculous. So this item would be overpowered as hell, even without having that first line, I would say. So you can start there, just delete this line. And then, you know, it's still pretty crazy. Like, just this is 125% extra damage on your helm. And there are many ways to benefit this, even if they make this an outrageous amount of resource cost reduction. So if you take this, for example, and let's say we edit this a little bit. Just say, okay, we delete this line here, right? So we do this. And now we could, for example, also say, hey, maybe this damage buff is actually a bit too big, right? So we can do 10% damage per stack. That is already kind of not terrible, I'd say. 10% damage per stack here. And you could still say this is a really powerful item. In fact, I would go as far as just doing this here, right? We have like this fancy new little color here for our new mythic uniques, as they're called, like Shaco and Grandfather and so on. And I think even at this point, with those changes here, you probably need to do something like this here to be real about this item. So this is how strong this item is. Like even in this version, I would probably use it. So this is just like what these new uniques are looking like right now. And I think this is not healthy for the game. Like I want to also have an option to use a legendary item. Like, okay, power creep is kind of expected to happen to some degree, but I also want to just have options, right? I want to be able to decide, okay, can I use a legendary helm? Can I use maybe another unique helm? Can I use this or that, right? But if every build just has like this predefined, ridiculously OP items, then it's just not really fun. You know, just try to get that item and boom, you're done. Yeah, this is kind of the intention of uniques, but I don't want to have that for like almost all of my item slots. And I think if Blizzard is trying to make these kind of uniques that have certain downsides, then these downsides need to be felt. They need to be real downsides. Something like resource cost reduction is not a downside. Even if you slap like plus 100% resource costs or something on this thing, that's not a downside. We can always figure out resources in this game. They have just recently buffed everything. Resource generation is buffed everywhere. We have insane resource aspects. We have starter skies. We have all these crazy combos that you can do to solve resources. We have no basic attack, unbridled rage, barbarian builds that spend like 70 fury like twice per second or something. Like that stuff exists and it works, and it's not hard to solve resources. Like if this thing is supposed to have like a real downside, it needs to say something like you cannot use skills that have a cooldown of more than 15 seconds, or you cannot deal damage to close enemies, or your resistances are minus 50%, or something like that. You know, those are downsides. You know, this is something to think about, something to build around. Resource construction is not a downside. And the same thing is also like with, for example, the Shard of Erathiel, right? So there's kind of this meme here that Chronix made, which I really love. So let me show that real quick. So this is basically what Season 5 builds look like. You equip Sword of Erathiel, you equip the Lucian, you equip a Starless, and boom, you slap it on. And everyone is a basic attack enjoyer now. There's, you know, so many buffs for basic attacks. Like Blizzard for some reason is really trying to push a basic attack meta with these items, it seems. And yeah, it's nice that we get more options to make builds, make a basic attack build and these kind of things. We already have some of them in the game. We had Bash Barb, we had Flay Barb. There's a Stormclaw, kind of down bad right now, but that exists. You know, Arclash, Sork, Heartseeker Rogue. There's a lot of stuff. And a lot of these builds will just get massively buffed. Like Heartseeker Rogue, one of the strongest builds in the game, just equips those 3 items in the future, and it's going to be like 10 times stronger than before. You know, like, I don't really get it. This seems so weird that they just made these items for already extremely powerful builds. Same story with the Barbs. Like, okay, they nerfed Bash now, but Bash Barb, again, you equip these items, you are way stronger than Season 4 Life, despite an 80% nerf to Bash. So this is where it's at, you know. These items give you more than a 5 times benefit over existing choices, basically, for basic attack builds. Like a lot more than that. Probably like more like 10 times or so. And this is the same story here with Shard of Erathiel. It has a downside of costing 25 primary resources when you spend, when you use a basic skill, right? But the thing is that, well, almost every single basic skill actually already produces resources. So there's not even a downside on this item. You know, a little bit of resource generation, a little bit of resource cost reduction. You don't even need much of it. And you can just perma-spam your skill anyway. Because, you know, on Barbs, all of your skills already produce resources. On Rogues, you can have a lot of lucky hit and then innovation. Like you want to combine this, for example, with the new dagger. And that already comes with innovation ranks, right? It already has like a lot of like synergy here. Like all these like new uniques are also kind of just designed to have a lot of interaction, a lot of like synergy between each other. So here with innovation ranks, this basically alone already negates any kind of downside, despite the rogue basic attacks not actually generating resources. And well, for example, druids, you also generate resources. You could think about a druid basic attack build that also runs this, for example. So like this downside is not a downside. I think it's fine to have items that say something like 100% bonus, 200, maybe even 300% bonus like this. But it also needs to have a downside that will cost you like half your build, basically. Like this needs to have a downside where you need to have 4 items to make up for it. But if you put like a 300% like multiplier on this item. This is just the reality. But then there's also some of these items that don't even have any downside, right? If you look at Locran's Talisman. Locran's Talisman is just like overtuned, basically. And it doesn't even have anything that kind of holds you back, something to think about or anything like that. The only thing about this item is try to get as much maximum resources as possible. And the more you have, the merrier, and it's going to be overpowered when you get to the point of like 200 plus maximum resources, which is quite achievable. This thing alone already comes with 27. You masterwork that up to like 50 or 60 or something like that. And then you equip, oh well, look, Lucian's Crown, plus 20 maximum resources. What a surprise. And then, oh, well, let's throw in maybe a Sword of Erathiel because you're playing basic attacks these days. Oh, look, it also has maximum resources. You know, you kind of see this. It's like, they all have like the same stats. They all kind of like harmonized. And suddenly, you know, you have like this insane combo between all of those crazy items. And, well, we're back to everyone plays basic stills. Everyone has the same 4 uniques in their build. And, or maybe 5, you know. And there's not really any variety. And I don't really know what they're trying to do here. Like, there need to be real downsides. A lot of these items are just overtuned. And I think it's painfully obvious how crazy they are if you look at them and if you think about them for like 2 minutes. So I'm not really sure why we are getting these kind of items with those numbers on them. It seems like there's kind of a killing off the tempering system that, and like the whole like legendary item rework that I've tried hard to create in Season 4, because it's basically just all uniques at this point. And the funny part is that some of these other uniques that kind of like compete with some of these new uniques are also really undertuned. So we look at the Shard of Erathiel, right? 300% extra damage for basic attacks, like with insane stat lines as well. Like these stats here are nuts. And then potentially, synergy with like this Locran's Talisman and these kind of things. And then you go down to the Sword uniques, and then we have this thing that is probably barely an upgrade for Chain Lightning. And then you have Vox Omnium, that is basically a direct competitor to the Shard of Erathiel, right? It goes into the same slot, so you can't combine them. And it buffs basically the same stuff as well, right? It buffs your basic attacks. In fact, I've been trying this out. I will make a video on this, and I'll tell the details about my journey with this. But TLDR, you have kind of the same effect in the same slots, almost the same stats as well, right? There's attack speed, there's the skills ranks, and then a bunch of like random stuff here, and then it buffs your basic attacks. And while I kind of like the design of this item, it's kind of an interesting item. It is just severely weaker than the Shard of Erathiel, right? You cannot have an offhand with this, and this only buffs you by 90%, and okay, you get 2 shots. It's just like a bigger downside basically than this. Like this downside here is smaller than having a staff equipped, I would say. Just having a staff is already a downside enough, basically, for the Vox Omnium. And then, okay, you get like 2 of these shots at once instead of only 1. But kind of the damage numbers, if you're optimistic, are maybe similar, but probably, not in favor of Vox Omnium here. And this is a class-specific item, right? And it's almost a build-specific item anyway. But for example, Spark doesn't really work well if you want to combine it with, for example, Pain Gorges. Firebolt doesn't work with this item if you're talking about Flameweaver and the Firebolt build. So this only needs like a Frostbolt build. So this is basically a Frostbolt item outside of like maybe having some kind of like support capabilities basically for getting these random small effects that these generators do. It's basically a build-specific Frostbolt item that is worse than whatever anyone else can use. Literally every single class can now use swords, and every single class can make a basic attack build with Shard of Erathiel, which is just a better way of playing a basic attack build, period. So yeah, there's a lot of problems on the PTR right now. Number one, with how accessible the items are to actually test them. A lot of these are also like mega bugged, I gotta say. We talked about the Crown of Lucion, like, it's just missing one of the stacks, so you actually spend less resources. Like also some of these other uniques, I would not be surprised if like not everything is working really properly here. I have no idea, for example, this item, I would not trust this at all, for example. We also have, for example, the Umber Crux here, this new rogue deck that I was really excited for. That is also bugged to hell with like what kind of effects double dip and, how it deals the damage. And sometimes it just does the full damage value instead of the reduced value. So there's a lot of stuff here going on, and you can barely even test some of these items properly because everything is just a bug to hell. And then somehow Blizzard also introduced like a lot of old bugs that have already fixed in the past in this PTR. Like for example, Victimize rogues. Victimize right now is basically back to Season 3 status where almost nothing was working with it properly. And if you go on the PTR, you're going to feel a lot weaker, even after equipping all of these new items. But then maybe the Umber Crux drops for you, and then you equip that thing, and this one is bugged to to hell with, insane double dipping, and suddenly you one-shot everything. We saw screenshots of people doing like 5 billion or 10 billion hits from this totem. So this would imply you would do something like a 20 billion hit, and then replicate 30% to the boss, for example, but that is obviously not happening. Not going to a 20 billion hit. It's just like that, right? So obviously there's a lot of really wonky stuff going on with some of these items. There's also like a weird synergy between Axial Conduit and this Crown of Lucion, where you just get like an infinitely stacking buff because this Chain Lightning keeps jumping and keeps draining mana, and it just kind of keeps stacking this buff. And you saw this 4 quadrillion damage, like Chain Lightning Sork, which is basically just because of some infinite damage stacking effect based on this Crown of Lucion and the Axial Conduit interaction. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on basically, and yeah, I don't really like it, to be honest, with those unique items. Especially those very generic unique items being so powerful is a mistake, I believe. It's fine if like certain skill-specific items are really powerful and they kind of like, elevate your build to the next level. Like there is like, the Staff of Endless Rage that I've talked about, the Fireball unique. Like it's fine if that item is pretty powerful, like, clearly a better choice than others. But even there, I would actually like to have options. I would actually like to think about, okay, do I want to use maybe a two-handed legendary stuff, put a crazy legendary power on it? Like, I don't think that's necessarily healthy, that basically most builds kind of like slowly go towards having specific uniques designed for them, like this Fireball unique, or like, you know, like a lot of other builds out there, right? There's like a lot of builds that have a unique, and you're kind of supposed to use that unique later on in the progression once you get it and you have a good roll of it. And I think it would be much nicer if we actually had the option to play Fireball, you know, either with the bouncy Fireball from the Gloves of the Illuminator, or just shooting Fireball into packs, right? But this build just kind of like ceases to exist, and I would even go as far as saying that Fireball as a build doesn't exist until you get the unique gloves for it. And it's kind of the same story for Frozen Orb right now. They made Fractured Winterglass, right, in Season 4. So this is a very powerful new unique here as well. Fractured Winterglass has a really high power level. There's like, if you want to play Frozen Orb, you have to use this thing, and anything else is just way, way weaker, because this will just like multiply the amount of Frozen Orbs you fire, and this gives you lots of other benefits that is like 3 times better than any other amulet you could ever have, basically. And I think it's okay for certain builds to work that way, and it's just like, you know, certain builds have a kind of like a progression. So you start out with a base skill, and then you get maybe some aspect for it, and then you combine this with maybe a unique for it as well. But I don't want every single build in the game to have its own unique and, you know, transform how the skill works. Like, why are we killing off, like, for example, Rapid Fire, right? Rapid Fire is a skill that has a certain function, and why are we killing off Rapid Fire with, you know, a new unique that just completely changes what the build does and how it feels, right? So Rapid Fire usually just fire these arrows, and, you know, using the past, it was used for like Flurry IF or Pen IF as like a single target, boss damage tool, for example. Those builds are just completely dead these days. You have to go one core skill. You can't really do double core skills anymore. Maybe in the future we're going to get some combinations there that make that work. But for now, okay, we have Rapid Fire. It does a certain thing. And then you get a unique, and it does something completely else. But I don't have the option to play Rapid Fire without the unique, because this unique is just so powerful. Like, it doesn't just transform the skill into lobbing, you know, these, you know, arrows, and, you know, it just feels very different, right? It has a very different behavior. Like, why does it have to have a damage buff, right? Why can it not just say this, for example? Like, why does it have Rapid Fire ranks? Just remove this as well. Like, I think this should be maybe more generic, and it should be more of an option. Like, do you want to change your Rapid Fire in a way that, you know, like, works differently, right? Do you want to make your fireballs bounce on the ground? Do you want to make your Rapid Fire like a lob in the air and do AoE? Like, this alone already elevates Rapid Fire anyway. Rapid Fire is one of the strongest rogue builds out there, and a slight nerf wouldn't even hurt it anyway, like this, for example. I think that the design of these new uniques that make a certain skill just incredibly powerful, where you need to use that unique, and you don't have the option to not run that unique. Like, even if you, let's say, even if Pen RF comes back, and we use Penetrating Shot here for AoE, and then Rapid Fire for single target, you would still have to run this ring, because it also gives all this damage to your Rapid Fire, and not to the rest. Like, you know, like, there's basically not really a reason to run Rapid Fire without this ring, even on a boss damage nuke only, right? Like, the interesting part about this item is that you have an explosion that deals AoE damage, and you don't just shoot an arrow that hits one target. But on the other hand, you need this to actually have Rapid Fire feel like it's doing anything. And you can't really make up for the loss of this item with just a generic, you know, random aspect or something on the ring. So I don't really like that this direction, like that we're going here for our uniques. I would like to have, you know, uniques that transform skills, that maybe open up new possibilities, but that are not absolutely mandatory for every single skill that has one of those uniques. And I feel that, especially now with these unique items being massively buffed, as Blizzard has indicated, with, you know, a lot of these changes that are coming to uniques are not even in the PTR yet. That most of them will be untested. We don't know anything about the balance for Season 5 really right now. It's just like a lot of stuff is really crazy. Everyone is way stronger, and stuff is really OP in many cases. And if this is the direction that we're going with all of the other uniques, then hallelujah, basically. Like, stuff is gonna go wild, and the balancing between the classes is gonna completely fall apart, because I don't really trust Blizzard to get this right here and potentially, you know, balance out Sorks with Barbs right now. There is a lot of work to be done. The gap is massive between those different classes. And well, even in between, we have like, you know, really powerful builds on some classes, really weak builds on the same class. So, you know, there was like a bit of a balance here and there, and some of these unique items and some of these changes like really shifted in favor of like 1 or 2 builds per class. And, you know, certain classes just being just generally way weaker than other classes. And I don't really expect that without an extra PTR later on, we will really get a kind of balanced meta. I think that Barbs is going to be OP again. Rogues are going to be very strong. And I think that with the way it looks right now, Sorgs, even if I imagine like the most optimistic outcomes for like what they're going to change, I don't think that Sorg is going to get anywhere close to that, for example. Now, I don't think that it's really so bad that we get a bit of power creep, especially right before the expansion. This is literally the last season before Vessel of Hatred comes out. And Vessel of Hatred is kind of like a good opportunity to, you know, do a bit of like a step back, a bit of a reset, you know, nerf everything again, because no one will really be bothered by that, because Vessel of Hatred is going to be the brave new world, and you know, whatever new baseline of balance or baseline of DPS or whatever they're trying to establish in the expansion, this will be the new baseline, and no one will feel bad about, you know, stuff being like, you know, differently balanced basically, right? So maybe this is just like kind of, okay, this is the last season, you know, have fun, go crazy, and then Vessel of Hatred comes out and maybe they're going to rebalance all of these items again. But that is also kind of strange, right? Like season 5 is already the big unique rebalance, and then season 6 comes out of the expansion and they're going to do another big unique rebalance again. I don't really see that happening, to be honest. So yeah, if anything, I guess the power creep is just going to continue going like crazy in Vessel of Hatred, because they're probably not going back and, you know, tuning down a lot of these effects. And if anything, we're going to get more power in the expansion, right? We're going to get our mercenaries. We're going to get, you know, new paragons, maybe more paragons. We get new skills. We get lots of new stuff, I guess, and lots of new, maybe new systems as well. You know, who knows what they're going to introduce. So if anything, the numbers are going to go out of control from here. And yeah, like I don't really like that too much with the direction that we're taking here. This is like basically Diablo 3 all over again. And at least in Diablo 3, sometimes they try to contain the power creep a little bit. You know, they try to nerf stuff. They try to not let it go too crazy until at some point they just said, okay, screw it, you know, we do quadrillions of damage. But this was like, you know, after like 8 years, right? And before that, you know, it was a bit more reasonable. And we're already getting to the point where, you know, individual basic attacks, you know, a bash barb is hitting for billions of damage or something like that, just left-clicking enemies. And, you know, every patch seems to introduce like yet another 0 on our damage. And with that kind of power creep, we're getting to Diablo 3 numbers really soon. And I'm not a fan of that, to be honest. In any case, this is kind of my feedback for the PTR right now and my impressions. So I also hope that Blizzard is going to take this to heart. And of course, I'm, you know, giving feedback to them as well, similar to what I just explained. Because, yeah, I mean, stuff gets stronger and everyone can say, hey, Shadow of Irrational is nice. It's going to elevate my build, right? And Crown of Lucian, man, I really need this because, you know, I'm playing Stormclaw Druid or I'm playing Shred Druid, man. I really need that buff to be any kind of functional. And I agree, you know, I don't want there to be weak builds that are unplayable or something like that. But you also have to see that it doesn't really solve the problem, because everyone is going to have a Crown of Lucian. The Bash buffs will have a Crown of Lucian, and the Shred Druids will have a Crown of Lucian. And everyone gets a ×2 multiplier on their helm. And this means that the gap between the builds is going to remain the same. Barb is up here and Shred is down here. Now, of course, you know, it makes the kind of completely terrible builds somewhat more playable if you buff them with this, and the super OP builds, well, they will just remain OP and this is going to crush everything anyway. So I guess it does have a slight benefit like that, where, you know, suddenly a build is at least somewhat thinkable, basically, like Shred Druid maybe might be a playable build now. But realistically, the gap is so large, and the gap is just going to remain the same. It's going to be like an S tier build there and a F tier build there. And, you know, you just move both of them up to, well, the same tiers again. One is going to remain S and one is going to remain F, because, you know, tiers are obviously, you know, for the relative power levels and not, you know, the absolute power levels, basically, right? So it doesn't really help with the general game balance. And we're not really gonna start playing like a shred druid or something like that just because Crown of Lucerne really exists, I believe. So I think what we really need is like some real balance between the different builds. Like we have established builds, right? We have Season 4, people have been blasting and theory crafting and making setups, and we know what the meta looks like for a lot of builds. We know how powerful all the builds are, and then we can say, okay, like these are the new uniques. We can kind of understand, okay, it does this much, this is a buff like that, and you can kind of math it out a little bit. But the math just doesn't really check out for a lot of these other builds where you just start at such a weak point, and there's nothing really in this patch that really helps some of those extremely underused, extremely weak skills like Shred, for example. So yeah, I think that there needs to be some, better look at the actual skills themselves and the supporting legendary aspects, the supporting, passives on the tree and so on, and try to like fine tune this better besides just like, okay, slap like a 200% multiplier on everything and then hope it works. I think this is just not really where we should be heading, I think. In any case, I hope you enjoyed my thoughts here. Let me know what you think, what we have just discussed here, and maybe what you have tested on the PTR. Maybe you have the same impressions, maybe you love it. And I would just like to know what is going on here, how people feel about it, because it is also kind of important for me to give feedback, because, it's not just my own opinion that I share with Blizzard, it's also, I share kind of the community sentiment as well. So I would like to know what's up with that. So that is it for now. So I'm going to have more videos on the PTR. I have tested a lot of builds here that, I've been working on. Here's, for example, a Rain of Arrows that was running in the background earlier when I was talking and so on. And there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff in this patch. But again, some of these builds have become more playable thanks to buffs. But we have this problem that the top end of the power creep is just going so high that most people will probably just play the same meta builds again anyway, basically. And something needs to change about that. So that's kind of the bottom line here. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed this video, and see you guys next time.